Hey there. Welcome to another Department of Community Affairs Office of Portfolio Management training. So this will be an extended use period training. This training will cover everything you need to know about your LIHTC property after the affordability period. Note that extended use period is commonly abbreviated as EUP and thus will be referred to as such throughout this training. So what exactly do you need to know about the extended use period? Well, firstly, you need to know when the extended use period or the EUP begins. What year of the LIHTC program? Secondly, what about properties with other funding sources or LIHTC properties with layered funding? When does the EUP begin for those projects? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Then we'll talk about the termination of extended use period. An extended use period for any building that is part of a project may terminate as a result of specific events. We will review those specific events a little bit later in the training. Next, you'll need to know about compliance activities during the extended compliance period. So we'll list some of those compliance activities to make sure that if you're in the extended use period, you stay in compliance. And if we talk about compliance activities, well, then of course, we need to talk about activities that can cause your property to be non-compliant. So I'll go a little bit into some of the non-compliant procedures. And lastly, I've included some items that don't neatly fit into any of the aforementioned categories, but you should certainly still know, such as fees, if any, and the role asset management plays during the EUP. Before we further explore the extended use period topics that you need to know, let's back up and make sure that we all understand exactly what the extended use period is. Properties awarded housing credits prior to 1990 had a compliance period of 15 years. A change in federal law required an additional 15 years of compliance, which is known as the extended use period. As a result, IRC Section 42H6 establishes that properties that were awarded housing credits in 1990 or afterwards must comply with the program restrictions for a total of 30 years, subject to certain exceptions. These restrictions are embodied in DCA's Land Use Restrictive Covenant, or LURC. After year 15 of the compliance period has ended, there may be no tax impact event of non-compliance. That is to say, after the compliance periods years 1 through 15, the state agency DCA is no longer required to report non-compliance to the IRS using IRS Form 8823. Owners must follow all provisions of the Land Use Restrictive Covenant LURC unless modified in writing by DCA. Non-compliance of provisions found in the LURC could have a negative impact on future scoring. Now that we have consensus about what the extended use period is, let's get back to the topics that you need to know. The change in federal law required an additional 15 years. So when does the EUP period begin? That is not a trick question, although it may seem like it. The extended use period begins at year 1. The year an owner starts claiming tax credits for a building, the credit, compliance, and extended use periods all begin that year. However, we consider the extended use period to be year 16 and beyond because the compliance monitoring requirements differ from the compliance or affordability periods of years 1 through 15. By this understanding, you need to know how to calculate the life of a tax credit property. Take this example as guidance. An owner claims credits in 2023. So the end of the credit period is 2032. That is 2023 plus 9 years for a total of 10 years. The end of the compliance period, also known as the affordability period, is then 2037. That's 2023 plus 14 years for a total of 15 years. Therefore, the end of the extended use period at minimum would be 2052, which is 2023 plus 29 years for a minimum of 30 years. Note that each building has its own credit, compliance, and extended use periods, even if they are part of the same multi-building project. So let's take a look at this example from the DCA LIHTC and Home Compliance Manual using some real dates. An owner claims credit on December 31st, 2023. Just because the credits were claimed on the last day of December, you cannot discount 2023 and decide to start the life of the tax credit property on the first of the following year. Therefore, the credit period ends December 31st, 2032, after 10 years. The compliance period ends December 31st, 2037, and the extended use runs for a minimum of 30 years, which would be December 31st, 2052. Notice this example illustrates how the EUP begins at year 1 with the credit and compliance periods. Okay, I think we got it. Let's move on to the type of funded projects that are required to adhere to the extended use period requirements. The DCA LIHTC and Home Compliance Manual provides lots of examples, tables, and comments on how owner agents will meet compliance requirements when combining LIHTC and home funds. However, properties in Georgia commonly have additional programs or funding sources. This can include HUD Section 8, HUD Section 811, rural development, or many other possibilities. Ensuring compliance for combined programs can be much like a puzzle, the manual states. Well, you don't have to solve any puzzles here. The Extended Use Monitoring Plan is only applicable to low-income housing tax credit or LIHTC restrictions. Due to the consequences of the recession that began in 2008, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, also known as ARRA, of 2009 established 2 temporary programs providing state allocating agencies with tools to help certain LIHTC finance projects to close financing gaps created by reduced credit pricing and lack of syndicator equity. The 2 programs are the Tax Credit Assistance Program, or TCAP, and the Section 1602 Tax Credit Exchange Program, also known as Section 1602. These special LIHTC programs must also adhere to the Extended Use Monitoring Plan. While we're here talking about the special LIHTC programs, it is worth noting a few other ARRA compliance and asset management requirements. In addition to the requirement to comply with the LIHTC rules through the extended use period, all programs are subject to asset management oversight by DCA/Georgia Housing Finance Authority, including but not limited to lease-up compliance monitoring, operational and financial reporting, and other monitoring under a regulatory agreement. I will remind you of these additional requirements towards the end of the training, but just wanted to mention it here since we were already on the topic. Another thing you need to know is, can you opt out of the tax credit program or terminate at extended use period? Internal Revenue Code IRC Section 42 and DCA's written policies effectively allows an owner to opt out of the tax credit program after year 15 and before the expiration of the extended use period for the property. DCA has posted its year 15 plan on the DCA website. While the code clearly states that opt-out provisions may only be made after year 15 of the compliance period, the process for terminating rent and income restrictions actually take place prior to the extended use period. The extended use period for any building that is part of the project shall terminate on the date the building is acquired by foreclosure or instrument in lieu of foreclosure. Be sure to know the exceptions of this policy, which can be found on the DCA website. A project shall also terminate on the last day of the 1-year period that begins on the date an owner properly submits a written request to the authority, DCA, asking the authority to assist in procuring a qualified contract for the acquisition of the low-income portion of the building, but only if the authority is unable to present a qualified contract during the one-year period. Such a request may not be made before the end of the 14th year of the compliance period or as agreed to by the owner in its application. So to answer the original question, can you opt out of the tax credit program? Yes, you can. During the extended use period through foreclosure or by qualified contract. As highlighted in a previous slide, willful termination of the EUP requires a qualified contract. To request a qualified contract, an owner must first submit an eligibility request. DCA, GHFA, general policies for qualified contract requests are for eligible properties. Properties are not eligible to submit an eligibility determination request until all of the following requirements have been met. First, the commencement of the 15th year of the compliance period for all buildings in the property. Then, the completion of any extension of the right to opt out made in any recorded land use restriction covenant for the property, and the entire property must be in full compliance with Section 42 requirements prior to submission of a request. Please note that this training does not cover policies related to the decontrol period, so please refer to our agency's website for DCA's decontrol period policy. For buildings of projects not seeking termination and thus entering the extended use period, the next topic you need to know are the EUP compliance activities and requirements. Under the DCA GHFA Declaration of Land Use Restrictive Covenants for housing tax credits, the owner agrees to comply with the following EUP requirements for the term of the agreement. The owner will maintain the applicable fraction by leasing units to individuals or families whose income meets the minimum set-aside requirements as irrevocably elected by the owner at the time of the first year of the credit period. The owner will maintain Section 42 rent and income restrictions. All LIHTC units shall be leased and rented or made available to members of the general public who qualify. The owner agrees to comply fully with the requirements of the Fair Housing Act. The owner will not refuse to lease a unit to the holder of a Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher because they hold a voucher. And then each unit, LIHTC unit rather, will remain suitable for occupancy. Additional EUP compliance activities include a determination of whether a household meets the LIHTC requirements be made by the owner agent at least annually based on the current circumstances of the household. Other restrictions as required under the specific year's QAP and related points the owner received to obtain a credit allocation. These restrictions are property specific within the respective declaration, and to the extent they are not otherwise time limited, the additional restrictions remain in force and effect during the entire extended use period or as otherwise stipulated in the LURC. The owner agent must provide written notice in the manner required by DCA GHFA to all LIHTC tenants no less than 6 months prior or as otherwise approved by the agency to the expiration date of the extended use period. See the agency website for specific notice requirements. Please see our compliance website for the notification that needs to be sent out, the template to use, and the frequency of which the notification needs to be sent. You can defer to the DCA compliance website for all of this information and, of course, a whole lot more. So we just reviewed DCA's extended use period compliance activities and requirements. So the following then are the procedures for non-compliance after the end of the compliance period while the extended use period is still in effect. In other words, this is how DCA will respond when compliance requirements are not met. An owner must comply with monitoring requirements and/or alert terms similar to the compliance period. The general time allowed by DCA GHFA for most issues is 45 days. An extension of up to 45 days may be granted with good cause. Noncompliance will affect an owner and management's ability to receive future funding from DCA GHFA and/or managed agency funded properties. Furthermore, the owner and management company will not be considered in compliance with program and state requirements if they are involved in the following below listed behaviors. First, repeated delays or ignoring requests for monitoring reviews. Second, failure to submit AOC reports and compliance monitoring fees. And lastly, failure to correct violations timely and/or otherwise ignoring the compliance and monitoring requirements. While this training identifies the information you need to know about the extended use period, this training is not exhaustive, and we strongly encourage you to review the DCA LIHTC and Home Compliance Manual, as well as the DCA Compliance website. You can also reference resources shared in the Compliance Blast. That said, I will conclude with more things to consider, starting with making sure you are familiar with all the agreements in place. These agreements are in addition to the LIRC and may have been signed 30 years ago, so be sure to find those paper copies if you need to, but do make sure that you are familiar with all the agreements in place. Next is the IRS guidance. IRS guidance is not exhaustive either, so be sure to check your guidance from time to time from the IRS. See if there are any updates. Make sure you're complying with any of the IRS guidance and the updates. And then training. Annual LIHTC training is not required. DCA highly recommends that LIHTC staff continue ongoing LIHTC training. However, it is not required. Asset management. During the entire extended use period, all programs are subject to asset management oversight by DCA GHFA. This can be found on page 218 of the DCA LIHTC and Home Compliance Manual. Also, there is no additional charge for monitoring during the extended use period. Next, utility allowance. The owner must maintain the utility allowance documentation and provide it upon request at any time during the remainder of the LIHTC extended use period. Lastly, resyndication. I left resyndication under more things to consider because resyndication will not be the case for everyone and it won't apply to most projects. But if resyndication does apply to you, do consider the following. For a subsequent allocation of credits, the new credits will also have an additional extended use period of at least another 30 years. Grandfathering people who income qualify for LIHTC units for the first set of credits and are in place at the start of the second set of credits automatically continue as LIHTC qualified for the second set without regard to their income at the time of the start of the new credits. You can refer to page 184 of the DCA LIHTC and Home Compliance Manual for this policy, with a great example on page 186. And that's it. Thank you so much for your time and attention for this extended use period training. I hope you learned something, but don't forget to use the resources that we have, the DCA LIHTC and Home Compliance Manual, the DCA website, and our Compliance Blast for additional guidance. My name is Tarika Dorner. I'm the OPM trainer, and OPM training can be reached by email at opm_training@dca.ga.gov. See you next time.